The chapel smelled of lilies and perfume and something thinner, expectation braided with a little nervous cruelty. Velvet pews were full of cousins, colleagues, people who had RSVP'd to witness a neat, tidy love story. At the front, under an arch heavy with roses, stood the woman everyone assumed would be remembered for wearing white, a woman who had practiced her smile until it fit like a glove. Her hand found her husband's arm the way she had planned it would, fingers resting in familiarity. His face was as polished as the program, handsome, composed, the kind of face made for photographs. They had invited an ex, not by accident, by design. The plan had begun weeks before, whispered over champagne, polished into a jewel of malicious theater. The bride had insisted. She wanted the ex to be seen, to be measured against the brightness of this new life. She wanted the ex to be remembered as nothing more than a punctuation mark in a sentence that the bride believed she was finally finishing. She had sent the invitation with a tone that was equal parts faux kindness and cold intent. "Please come, we would love to see you at our wedding." The woman who arrived wore red, the color of attention and blood and boldness. Her belly curved beneath the fabric like a secret heroically kept. She moved with a dignity that turned heads and softened a few of the hard faces in the crowd. People noticed the way she cradled her stomach when she walked, a private smile hiding in public. She'd been his once, not always happily, not without the bumps that fate provides, but she had been part of the life that. This groom was now dressing in silk and vows. No one introduced her at the microphone. The bride did. The bride's voice was bright and easy as she spoke, rehearsed for effect. She thanked everyone, made a joke about family, then turned the moment into a stage. "We thought it would be special to have someone from the past sing a song for us," she said with a smile that smelled faintly of triumph. She announced it as if she were presenting a piece of theater. There were polite claps, curious eyes. The red dress woman nodded, her smile patient, as if she had been expecting this. A silence settled like a sheet. The organist cued the first chords, and the room leaned in like people who know they are about to witness a small version of history. The bride sat back, satisfied, the bridegroom's hand squeezing her knee as if in solidarity. The ex, the pregnant woman, took the breath that singers do. It was a long, steady thing, filling the space with something like resolve. Then she opened her mouth and sang. At first the song sounded small, simple melody, words like soft stones. People shifted, adjusting their expectations. They thought they had come for humiliation. They had come for a moment of awkward pity that would eventually fold into laughter behind polite hands. Guests reached for their phones, for the tiny thrill of recording someone else's discomfort. The groom looked away. The bride's smile held like a shuttered window. This was the tableau she had wanted. But the voice widened. It wasn't just loud. It was honest. It cut through the clink of glasses and the rustle of dresses with a clear soprano that carried the kind of lived, in truth, only a life that had been lived hard could teach. Her phrasing tugged at the edges of the lyrics, and the room, which had been waiting to snicker, stopped. The notes hung like lanterns. The pregnant woman's face was an island of calm, and when she sang, she told a story that was not the one the bride had intended for her to tell. She sang not about the groom or the wedding, but about nights found alone, about the thread of a mother's faith, about learning to hold a heart that had been broken into manageable pieces, and then learning to make art out of those pieces. She sang about the city at 2 a.m, the bus stop bench, the hands that would offer change and the hands that would refuse to help. She sang about learning to be both soft and steady, about the strange joy of expecting a child when the rest of the world had no map for you. By the time the bridge rolled in, the air had shifted. People who had come to mock felt their mockery dissolve into something that resembled shame. The groom's jaw tightened. The bride blinked once like someone who had misread an invitation. The notes were doing work. They were making the room do something none of this carefully arranged cruelty had planned for. They were asking people to be kind. Midway through the second verse, the pregnant woman paused for a breath and looked not at the bride, but at the crowd. Her eyes passed over the rows, over the aunt who had once been silent at family arguments, over the cousins who had once sided with the bride in small cruelties. They met the groom's eyes. For a second, the music softened like a tide receding. He had seen her before in the soft light of day, in the kind of scenes couples don't rehearse for, during arguments, in the quiet early mornings, In the moments they had both believed they were choosing different things, simply because they were afraid to say what they wanted. The lyrics shifted. She sang about being pushed, gently at first, then with a quiet firmness, into decisions that were not always her own. She sang about choosing safety over drama, about the sterile calculations people make to protect reputations, while other people's lives are treated as collateral. She sang about the small humiliations that stack into a life situation that looks unremarkable from the outside and catastrophic from within. Each phrase was a clean, precise strike that exposed something that had been festering under polite smiles. A few guests looked down at their laps. One of the bridesmaids plucked at her bracelet the way people do when they are uncomfortable. The minister's face, always a practiced softness, creased for a moment like paper left in rain. The groom's hand, which had been a steady anchor at the shoulder of his bride, slid away. He looked smaller than he had in the photos sold to the guests as the story of him. The bride, meanwhile, kept her smile on like a mask in an old play. She had expected pity and crowdsourced humiliation. Instead, truth moved through the hall and left an outline of conscience. The chorus hit like sunlight. The pregnant woman's voice climbed and did not fall. She sang a line about learning to stand in the middle of judgment and still cradle hope. She sang a line about the baby who would come with a name and a future, and the possibility that that future could be stitched with both struggle and dignity. No sobs, no theatrical collapse, only a raw, luminous telling. People began to cry softly, the kind of water slow leaking that happens when something honest finds the ruins of a well-constructed pretense. For a few seconds, the room felt like something else entirely. A congregation, perhaps, or a theater where the truth had finally been allowed to do its work. The groom, who had been avoiding her gaze, felt a tug in his chest. The song did not try to shame him or to lambast anyone on purpose. It simply was. The truth, when sung by someone who had carried it in their ribcage for months, as a way of making the kind of dissonance that crowns and silk cannot fully cover. When the last chord faded, there was a remarkable silence that felt like an intake of breath taken by 100 bodies at once. For the first time all evening, the bride's smile faltered. The applause that began was tentative, then sincere. People rose, some wiping their cheeks with cocktail napkins, some standing slowly as if rising from the bench of a long argument. The pregnant woman smiled at them, not triumphantly, but with a steady, exhausted grace. She stepped back from the microphone as if she had given something she had wanted to give all along, and now it was done. Later, in the space between the buffet and the photo booth, the groom slipped away. He found the pregnant woman in the reception hallway, where the light was better and the sound of the band was a distant wave. He stood for a moment with his hands in his pockets, uncertain how to be a man who had been complicit in a plan that had hurt someone he had once loved. The ex looked at him and did not reach for blame. She looked at him with the tired kindness of someone who had done the work of making peace with the things she could not change. "I didn't want you to be humiliated," she said quietly. Her voice was the same gentle instrument that had moved the chapel. "But I needed them to hear something true." He opened his mouth and closed it. The truth is always inconvenient when it arrives dressed as accountability. He confessed then, in the dim corridor, the things he had pushed away, the late calls he had ignored, the attempts to connect he had stifled. He admitted to the part he'd played in the erosion of their relationship, the cowardice that had kept him silent when truth might have changed everything. There was no dramatic scene. Love stories don't always resolve with fireworks. Sometimes they resolve with the slow, careful labor of doing right. She listened. He apologized. He spoke of regrets that were all elbows and awkward furniture in the chest. He touched her hand, clumsy and sincere, and she did not pull away. He asked if she was okay, how she felt about the baby, whether she wanted anything from him beyond common decency. She told him she needed honesty more than anything, and maybe someday a CEO parent who could show up. She did not promise more than she felt possible. She had learned the art of small truths and measured hope. Words spread through the reception like a soft rumor. The bride, furious now in a way that had nothing to do with ceremony, confronted the couple with the brittle armor of someone who had been publicly unmasked. Her accusations were sharp, designed to wound where cruelty likes to land. She called names, made pointed comments about dignity and respect. Guests watched. Some shifted uncomfortably. The newly rising anger in the room was sour and hot, but it had nowhere to land because the song had already done its work. The chorus of attention had redirected. People began to look inward. People, who had once been ready to take sides based on the tidy packaging of a narrative, began to ask quieter questions. They talked in corners about what they'd seen and what they had not thought to ask. The bride realized, belatedly, that her spectacle had backfired. She looked small, not because the song had hurt her, but because the truth had made her match the pettiness she had chosen. Power evaporates quickly when it's exposed as performance. In the weeks that followed, the groom's life changed in subtle, honest ways. He grew quieter in Instagram photos and more earnest in real conversations. He took turns at doctor's visits and learned the awkward parenting of someone who had once treated love as a line item. He asked questions. He listened. He carried the errands and learned lullabies like algebra, stumbling at first, then with a humbled patience. The pregnant woman, who had been pushed into a moment, found an unexpected community. Some guests reached out with offers of help that were not performative. A few old friends admitted they had been wrong to laugh. There were still battles. Accountability is not a single tidy act, it is a thread pulled through a daily tapestry. There were conversations about custody and support, and about the ways in which reputations bend toward the comfortable storybooks we hand to ourselves. There were moments when the wedding photographs felt like a bruise, but there was also the slow accrual of better choices, of gestures that were not performative because the room had already been shown the difference between optics and substance. Over time, the bride's sharp edges softened into something others described as regret. She apologized in private and in public, fumbling through a humility that felt foreign to her. Some accepted it, others did not. People who were once quick to judge began to understand how terrible and small the hunger to perform cruelty can be. The pregnant woman, who had been placed under a spotlight against her will, discovered that the spotlight could be used for something else entirely, to show the dignity of starting over. The months that followed did not bring a fairy tale resolution, and that was part of the lesson. Life rewrites itself slowly. There were awkward conversations and nights when doubt pressed close. There were moments of triumph small enough to go unnoticed by anyone but the people living them. A shared laugh over spilled cereal, a hand that remembered to pick up a forgotten jacket, a father who learned how to soothe a midnight cry. The woman in red kept singing in little rituals, not to prove a point but to remind herself of the sound of her own steady truth. Her song had done what brittle plans could not. It had shifted the center of a story. Where there had been performance, there was now a messy human attempt at repair. It did not erase all pain, nor did it pretend everyone had been flawless. But it did something harder. It made the people around her face the consequences of their actions, and it taught them that mercy can be louder than mockery. In the end, the lasting image was not of a woman forced to sing to be humiliated, but of a woman singing and claiming her place in a world that had tried to make her a spectacle. The audience left the chapel that evening with wet cheeks and lighter hearts, having learned that small acts of compassion can begin exactly where cruelty once tried to center itself.